In this series, Dominance and Duality, I have built an argument that our conscious experience, or what I call vision, is an emergent property that occurs due to the integration of the dorsal and ventral processing streams. In the last video, we talked about how these streams can be roughly conceptualized as the neural mechanisms that underlie perception and imagination. We discussed that this conceptual dissociation is possible because the two processing streams, as well as the two sides of our brains, can operate somewhat independently of each other because each side of the brain has multiple dualistic representations of our body called homunculi. These homuncular models are a kind of topographic map, a low-dimensional representation of higher-dimensional structures. For example, in geography, topographic maps are used to represent landscape elevation, so that the height of mountains and valleys can be seen on a two-dimensional map. The homunculi are topographic maps in our brain that represent various aspects of conscious interface with our bodies. Scientists refer to the homunculi as somatotopic rather than topographic, because they represent our soma, which means body, rather than the topology of a landscape. For example, you can see two homunculi here in the cortex. The motor homunculus is a map of how frequently we use different parts of our body to perform complex actions, while the sensory homunculus is a map of how much neural space we use to process bodily sensations. As you can see, there is significantly more brain power dedicated to mapping out our hands, mouths, and tongues compared to the rest of our body, because these areas represent the most important body parts for performing actions and perceiving sensations. This image shows us why they are topographic, because while they are maps of the body, they are quite literally laid out across the surface of our brains. As a quick aside, these maps do not just exist on the surface of the brain, they also extend into the depths of the cortex. The cortical homunculi were discovered when doctors Wilder Penfield, Edwin Bouldry, and Theodore Rasmussen performed neurosurgery on conscious patients and electrocuted specific parts of the cortical surface. In this way, they could get a subjective account about what the patient experienced when they stimulated specific brain regions. What they found was that depending on where they electrocuted the cortex, the patient would either report feeling a sensation in a particular part of the body, or a part of their body would move without their volitional input. By systematically stimulating different parts of the brain and recording what happened, they created these maps, which are themselves topographic maps that represent the findings of these neuroscientists. Penfield called them homunculi, which means a small human or humanoid creature, because they quite literally look like little misshapen people. And in a very real sense, they are recursive and self-referential models of some of the aspects of our identity. They seem to be at least some of the areas in which neural processing coalesces into an integrated consciousness or sense of self. After all, this is how they were discovered in the first place. A sensation of a particular part of your body will suddenly emerge into your subjective experience when there is activity in these areas of the brain. More recently, it has been shown that the size and shape of the cortical homunculi change when we practice our motor behaviors. For instance, the part of the motor homunculus that represents the fingers will actually decrease in size with extensive piano practice, which makes the production of that specific action more efficient with every repetition. But it isn't just physical action and sensation that gets processed in these brain regions. Surrounding the homunculi, there are brain areas which process the transformation of an action plan into a motor plan. In other words, these brain regions take our abstract goals for the immediate future and turn them into actionable behaviors. And this is where things get truly fascinating. Notice that the dorsal pathway runs directly into these two brain regions, which intricately connects this processing stream to the production of action. As we talked about in the last video, we can make an oversimplification and compare the dorsal stream to imagination. And in a very real sense, what we imagine has a huge impact on our motor action and behavior in general. Amazingly, for some specific tasks, visualization can actually improve performance just as much as real physical practice can. Professional athletes are well acquainted with this power of visualization. Visual imagery is essential to get the slight edge that can make or break you at the most intense levels of sport. And that's all well and good for the Olympic athlete, but visualization has a surprisingly powerful and unconscious impact on our everyday behaviors as well. Here's an interesting demonstration from an Oprah interview with Deepak Chopra. I urge you to try this at home if you're skeptical. You'll be amazed at how much influence your vision has on your unconscious motor processing.
Now just while you're holding that still, mentally have the idea it's moving back and forth. Mentally have the idea that it's moving. Okay? Don't worry, it'll start moving, and it'll start moving wider and wider. See, it's already doing that. Okay? In any direction you want. There you are. Now once it's doing that, just change the idea in your mind that instead of swinging it like that, it's going to start swinging like this in a different direction.
Oh my
Mentally.
heavens.
See? Now, mentally have the idea that it's going to start making circles. Just mentally have the idea it's going to start making circles. There you are, see? Circles. Now bigger and bigger circles. There you are.
Oh my heavens.
Okay?
I didn't think I could do it. I was feeling a lot of pressure here.
Okay?
As far as I'm aware, there has not been much research into the neural mechanisms behind this kind of effect. That being said, it would make sense if visualization worked to tightly control coordinated motor actions like this because of the link between the cortex and the cerebellum. As we talked about in the last video, the cerebellum has topographic maps of the cortex, just like the cortex has topographic maps of bodily representations. When specific parts of the cortical homunculi are activated by visualization, for example, the corresponding parts of the cerebellum will also be activated, leading to a powerful but unconscious influence on motor coordination. As I mentioned earlier in this video, practicing a behavior changes the size and shape of the cortical homunculi in the long term. Visualization could easily cause the same kind of changes as physical practice, which would likely lead to a change in the cerebellar representations of the cortex. This hypothetical pathway represents a direct means to consciously affect and control our unconscious behavior in the long term. Originally, the cerebellum was only thought to control motor coordination, because when it is damaged, we lose the capacity to perform finely regulated behaviors like walking, reaching for objects, and focusing with our eyes. But emerging evidence is suggesting that the cerebellum plays an important role in things like perception, cognition, and mood. Take, for example, the relationship between facial expression and mood. It is well established that smiles and frowns aren't just external indicators of mental states. These facial expressions also play a direct role in the induction of feeling. In other words, smiling makes you happy while frowning makes you sad. To bring this all together, consider that imagining yourself being happy or sad will induce an unconscious change in the facial muscles linked to the creation of that mood. This is a fascinating feedback loop whereby conscious visualization can cause minor but important changes in unconscious behavior and motor control that will lead directly to the production of the intended feeling. Some people take this much further than just emotional control and claim that visualization can manifest all sorts of things in your life. We won't be exploring the mystical implications of this idea, but it is worth contemplating how your intentional vision unconsciously molds your perception. In the next video, we will consolidate all of the neuroscientific detail from the first 4 parts of this series to discuss how conscious vision is created through the integration of duality, what has been variously referred to throughout this series as logic and emotion, the dorsal and ventral processing streams, and perception and imagination. Finally, we will discuss how the dominance in duality emerges in our conscious reality. Stay tuned for next time, and thank you for watching The Paradox Perspective.